Hello and welcome. Today I will be taking you through the process of me knitting a vintage vest from the 60s. The yarn I'm using is Drops Naples in the color brown, which I've had in my stash at this point for many years. It's an Aran weight yarn with a yardage of 75 meters per 50 grams, and I chose this one in particular because I have a lot of experience using this, so I was very confident when it came to my gauge. So here I am showing you my notes before starting, as I made a large number of modifications, which I will explain in more detail as the video progresses. Let's get started. This pattern is no different from most of its contemporaries and is thus knit flat in 3 separate parts: the back, the left front and the right front. These pieces are blocked separately and then seamed together, after which the button band and armhole edges are worked. I decided to keep this construction as I believed that it would be beneficial to the structural integrity of the garment. I'm starting off by casting on stitches for the back and knitting in 1 by 1 rib for a couple of centimeters. The first major modification you might have already caught is that I'm using a lighter weight yarn. The pattern asks for a bulky weight yarn with a gauge of 12 stitches per 10 centimeters or 4 inches, but I opted for an Aran weight yarn using a gauge of 17 stitches instead, as that was the nicest yarn I had at the moment for this project. This is a tiny interruption, but I just wanted to note that I knit in segments of at most 25 minutes with at least 5 minutes of rest in between, which will often include some light exercises such as squats, wall push-ups and light stretches to reduce the risk of injury. And I have to say that doing this has been a total game changer for me. Returning to the vest, after the ribbing is done, the back is worked even in stockinette. Once you've reached your desired length, it's time for the armhole shaping. This is done by binding off a number of stitches over 2 rows and then decreasing 1 stitch every other row a couple of times on each end. The back is then worked again even in stockinette until it's time for the shoulder shaping. The original pattern calls for binding off large sections at the start of a number of rows, but I decided to use German short rows for the shoulder shaping instead. For more information on exactly how to do this, Roxanne Richardson has an excellent video, which I'll link in the description box below. As you can see, this method of shoulder shaping has left me with live stitches on each end of the back, which I've put on hold using some waste yarn. My idea was to do the same thing with the front panels and then use a 3-needle bind off to attach the front pieces to the back. After the back was done, I went ahead and lightly blocked the garment. I did this mostly for ease when it came to seaming, although I will already state now that I made a major mistake by slipping the first stitch on each row. I'm very inexperienced when it comes to knitting garments flat and seaming them up, so I wasn't aware that by slipping the first stitch, I'm making the seams more unstable. I'm glad, however, that I noticed it with this project, because now this won't be a problem in any of my future projects. Having put the back on my drying rack, it was time to start on the right front. I again did a long tail cast on, the same amount of ribbing as the back, and then it was time to start the cable pattern. I decided to swap the original cable for that of a horseshoe. This was purely for aesthetic reasons, and it did actually make the process longer as I needed to cable more often. For the rest of the front panel, I mostly just followed the pattern, which after having knit a couple of cable repeats asks you to increase at the armhole side. This is to accommodate one's rib cage, as there is substantial negative ease at the waist, as could be seen in the pattern picture. When the panel has reached the height where it's time for the armhole shaping, it is worked the same way as the back. The only difference is that at a certain point, stitches are also decreased evenly at the neckline to create a V shape. I decreased the stitches until I had the same number of stitches on my needles as there were life stitches on one side of the back. I had at first made a mistake by casting off half of the stitches of the front panel, but this was very easy to fix, after which I did a 3-needle bind off. Usually the 3-needle bind off is done by putting 2 knitted pieces together with the right sides facing, but I thought the other way around would make for a nice decorative stitch line. Having finished the garment, I am now indifferent towards that, and I think next time I would just do it in the common way. After having blocked and attached the first panel to the back, it was now time for seaming. I found a number of useful videos on YouTube about the mattress seam, both for 1x1 rib and stockinette. One problem that I did have was that when I was working my way towards the armhole, the two pieces didn't exactly align, so I ended up ripping back a bit and redoing it, and I think it worked out well. This was also, by the way, the point where I realized that slipping the first stitch was a mistake. Having the first part of the vest seamed up, I started to think about what to do with the armhole edge. The pattern calls for 2 rows of single crochet stitches, but I thought that an applied I-cord edge would give me more of a finish I was looking for. The way I made a seamless edge here was by doing a provisional cast on and using the Kitchener stitch to seam the start and the end of the I-cord together. After all that was done, it was time to try out the garment, and I was really pleased with how it was looking. My only concern was that I might not achieve the amount of negative ease I had desired, and as it turned out, this would be the case as I knit one size too big. I now only have a faint memory of being a bit nervous when it came to modifying the pattern, which I think was the reason why I chose for a bigger size, because I thought that if it fails, at least I have something that is somewhat wearable. In any case, it was time for the left front panel, and this went on without much of a hitch. Far faster than the right side, which I think was mostly due to being more familiar with the horseshoe cable, because on the right side I made a couple of mistakes and had to rip back or fix the cabling using a crochet hook. After seaming the sides, I only needed to work the button band and the other armhole, and I decided to start with the button band. Just like the armhole, the pattern said to crochet the button band. I had initially thought about a double knit button band, but I ended up knitting a tiny tube instead, using Judy's magic cast on and the Kitchener stitch to close it up. Bit by bit, as I was knitting the button band, I seamed it to the vest. The most important thing I learned when knitting this button band was that the best way to do this is to actually start with the section of the button band with the button holes, as matching up the buttons to the holes is easier than the other way around. I learned this the hard way, unfortunately, and so I struggled a bit with the lowest button and buttonhole, where I had to reposition both of them twice. After that, all there was left was to do another applied I-cord edge and I was done. This is the end result and I am super happy with how it turned out. I think it just looks really lovely and I'm really not fussed about knitting a size too big. You know, I can always come back to this pattern, modify it a bit more, and then boom, have the negative ease vest that I had been aiming for. So yeah, I do think that I'm going to be doing that in the near future. I still have quite a bit of drops Naples left. In conclusion, I think this was a really good experience and I managed to learn a lot with such a short project. If you are interested at looking at the original pattern, I'll leave a link to where you can find it for free on freevintageknitting.com. In any case, thank you so much for watching and I hope to see you soon in another video.